to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly, it involves Caitlin Clark.
Could the Caitlin Clark chapter in Indiana be finished before it ever really had a chance to breathe? That's the explosive question now reverberating across the entire sports landscape, as what began as quiet whispers surrounding the WNBA's most electric star have now erupted into a full-throated, undeniable crisis. This isn't simply a story about a rookie adjusting to a new level or a franchise stumbling through a difficult stretch. This is about a once-in-a-generation phenomenon teetering on the edge of collapse. A transcendent talent being systematically pushed to her absolute limits by what many credible voices are now openly describing as a coordinated campaign of sabotage from virtually every direction. And now, one of the most powerful and influential voices in the entire sports media universe, Stephen A. Smith, has essentially stepped forward and confirmed music. What legions of concerned fans had already begun to suspect. The situation unfolding in Indiana has reached a genuinely dangerous level of instability, and the very real possibility of Caitlin Clark walking away from the franchise is no longer something being whispered only in the darkest corners of fan forums. It is a terrifyingly rational and logical conclusion. The drama surrounding her is intensifying with every passing week. Music. The weight of expectations is crushing down harder with every single tip-off. And behind closed doors, a vicious and bitter internal war is being waged. One whose outcome will determine the fate of not just Clark herself, but of an entire league riding on her shoulders. She was supposed to single-handedly launch women's basketball into an entirely new stratosphere. What the world celebrated as a beautifully inevitable fairy tale, the triumphant arrival of a collegiate legend destined to reshape professional women's basketball forever, has swiftly and mercilessly curdled into a very public and very ugly nightmare. Sources embedded within and surrounding the league are now converging on the same alarming conclusion. A perfect and devastating storm of internal dysfunction, league-wide professional envy, and a level of institutional betrayal so shocking and so brazen that virtually no one saw it coming. The fuse on this powder keg has been burning for weeks, the tension crackling louder with every new controversy, and the detonation that threatens to shake the WNBA to its absolute foundation now appears not just possible, but virtually inevitable. This story has long since ceased to be about basketball. Music. It has become the story of a systematic breakdown. A machine seemingly turning against the very person sent to save it, and one remarkably talented young woman fighting simply to survive the chaos surrounding her. The national firestorm truly ignited and claimed undeniable legitimacy the moment Stephen A. Smith, a man whose platform carries the full cultural weight of an institution, stepped in front of his national television audience and placed the blame firmly, unapologetically, and without hesitation directly at the feet of the WNBA and the Indiana Fever organization. He wasn't picking apart a questionable timeout or second-guessing a halftime adjustment. He constructed a thorough, devastating indictment of a league and a music franchise that appeared to be actively, almost deliberately, undermining the most valuable asset women's professional basketball has ever produced. He spoke with barely contained fury about a pattern of disrespect and calculated physical targeting that bore absolutely no resemblance to standard rookie seasoning, labeling the entire situation a damn disgrace and a humiliating stain on the face of the sport. His words landed with enormous and undeniable force, not as a reporter chasing a transaction headline, but as a formidable cultural voice diagnosing a deeply embedded sickness rotting away at the league's very foundation. Music. He argued forcefully that the people in positions of power, from rival players to front office executives, had become so consumed by petty resentment and entrenched gatekeeping that they were prepared to burn down their own golden goose, the one person who delivered them charter flights, packed arenas from coast to coast, and television contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. Smith's passionate and unflinching defense of Clark sent an unmistakable signal to a worldwide audience that what people have been witnessing on the court night after agonizing night is not remotely normal. It was a public declaration, music, a direct statement to the world that the environment Clark has been thrust into is toxic, deeply unprofessional, and genuinely threatening to her long-term career. Music. He gave a credible and mainstream platform to the millions of fans who had been sitting at home night after night with a growing, nauseating sense that something was profoundly and fundamentally broken about the way she was being treated. This was not routine sports commentary. It was a grave and urgent warning, a warning that if the situation does not change, and change dramatically and immediately, the league could lose the singular person responsible for delivering them a level of visibility, viewership, and mainstream cultural relevance they had spent decades only dreaming about. His sharp and deliberate remarks instantly elevated the quit rumors from fringe fan speculation into a bone-chilling and entirely believable reality. Because a voice operating at that level of influence does not sound an alarm of that magnitude unless the building is already fully engulfed in flames. But the suffocating external pressure from the rest of the league, a relentless and hostile gauntlet she must navigate every single night, represents only one half of this unfolding disaster. The deeper rot, according to a growing chorus of insiders and seasoned analysts, may actually be taking hold from inside the Indiana Fever organization itself, rooted specifically in the troubling leadership and decision-making emanating from the bench. While outside attention has occasionally pointed elsewhere, the true origin of the internal friction and a bewildering absence of genuine support appears to trace directly back to Indiana's own head coach, Christie Sides. On paper, the dynamic between a head coach and a franchise-altering superstar should represent the most unshakable partnership in the building, a unified front presenting strength and solidarity to a hostile outside world. But fans and basketball purists have looked on in stunned disbelief as the on-court product has appeared disjointed, alarmingly unpolished, and tactically incoherent. Baffling and inconsistent lineup decisions, a glaring absence of any imaginative offensive architecture designed to generate clean looks for Clark, music, and defensive game plans that routinely leave her isolated and marked for punishment have become the defining and embarrassing signatures of the Fever's deeply troubled season. The post-game press conferences, however, have told an even more damning and revealing story. Music. Rather than standing at that podium and fighting with fire and conviction for her franchise player against the brutal and often flagrantly non-basketball physicality being directed at her, Coach Sides has repeatedly offered tepid, hollow, and carefully sanitized responses completely devoid of any real urgency. Following particularly reckless and dangerous fouls against Clark, her stunning reluctance to express genuine public outrage has echoed like a thunderclap through a fan base desperate for someone on the inside to stand up and go to war for their star. Music. It has fed a powerful and deeply troubling narrative that she is either completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of responsibility that comes with this moment, wholly unprepared to manage the extraordinary pressure and global scrutiny that accompanies coaching a worldwide superstar, or worse, music, that she has fundamentally failed to appreciate the full physical and psychological damage being systematically inflicted upon her most important player. This cultivates a toxic and suffocating environment where a young player is left feeling utterly exposed and abandoned by the one person who should be standing loudest in her corner. This very visible and deeply felt absence of support from her own sideline represents a psychologically devastating blow, layering a profoundly personal dimension of internal betrayal on top of the ceaseless barrage of external hostility she is forced to endure every single night she laces up and walks onto that floor. And that external hostility has been nothing short of relentless and at times absolutely staggering in its brazenness. Music. This isn't simply a matter of playing physical defense or delivering a standard welcome to the pros moment to a highly touted rookie. What Caitlin Clark is being subjected to is a calculated, premeditated campaign of physical intimidation engineered specifically to break her down. The most notorious and widely condemned example, naturally, was the blatant off-ball hip check delivered by Chicago Sky's Chennedy Carter. A play that had absolutely zero connection to basketball and was entirely about dispatching a thuggish, deliberate message of contempt and disrespect. But that was merely the most glaring moment within a deeply disturbing and ongoing series of hard fouls, cheap shots, illegal screens, and recklessly aggressive closeouts that have become an entirely predictable nightly ritual. Opposing players throughout the league appear to be operating under a clear and unspoken collective directive. Be as physically punishing as the game will allow with Clark, constantly probe the outer boundaries of what officials will tolerate, and determine whether you can shatter her spirit before you do lasting damage to her body. What makes the entire situation so much more sinister and troubling, music, is the absolutely baffling response, or far more accurately, the resounding absence of any meaningful response, from both the league office and music, critically her own teammates. It required a massive and sustained wave of outrage from fans and media personalities across the country to pressure the league into reluctantly upgrading Carter's foul to a flagrant. And even after that long overdue acknowledgement, music, the dominant sentiment circulating among many veteran players was that Clark was simply soft and needed to develop thicker skin. This has left her stranded on a completely desolate music island, expected to absorb a sustained level of punishment that would have battle-hardened NBA veterans demanding their teammates step in and demanding accountability from officials. It is a lonely, maddening, and genuinely physically dangerous place to be. And it rips the curtain back to expose a dark and deeply troubling underbelly within the league, one where professional jealousy and simmering resentment appear to be consistently overriding basic standards of sportsmanship and elementary concerns for player safety, producing an environment where music, the league's single greatest asset, simultaneously serves as its most hunted target. Just when it appeared the situation on the floor could not possibly deteriorate further, Clark absorbed what many observers are now calling the ultimate and most devastating betrayal of all. She was inexplicably and without adequate explanation omitted from the United States Olympic women's basketball roster. That single decision detonated a shockwave of disbelief across the entire sports world, with the fallout radiating far beyond the traditional boundaries of the WNBA fanbase. Music. From a narrowly basketball-focused standpoint, one could strain to construct a barely coherent argument for her exclusion rooted in her limited time with the senior national team program. But from a marketing, business development, and cultural growth perspective, it was a catastrophic and entirely self-inflicted wound of historic proportions. Leaving the single most popular, most watched, and most culturally impactful basketball player in the entire country, male or female, off of an Olympic roster felt like a cold, calculated, and deeply personal slap directed squarely at her face. It was the basketball establishment, the deeply entrenched old guard, transmitting a frigid, crystal-clear, and unmistakable message directly to Clark and to every one of her millions of devoted fans. You are an outsider. You have not been accepted. You do not belong among us. For Clark, who had spoken openly and emotionally about her lifelong dream of pulling on a USA jersey and competing on the grandest stage the sport has to offer, this had to land as a crushing, gutting, and deeply personal emotional wound. It powerfully cemented the isolating and infuriating realization that regardless of how many seats she fills, how many viewership milestones she obliterates, or how much unprecedented mainstream attention she channels toward their sport, there remain powerful and entrenched figures in positions of authority who are fundamentally opposed to her thriving on her own terms. The Olympic snub was never just about a single spot on a traveling roster. It was a loud, public, and deeply humiliating declaration that the very architecture of the system she was supposed to be saving had chosen to work against her. Music, this staggering level of institutional rejection, stacked directly on top of the nightly physical punishment and the mounting dysfunction within her own organization, produced a potent and combustible mixture of frustration and despair more than sufficient to drive any competitor to their absolute breaking point. And that deeply corrosive feeling of being a permanent outsider, unwanted and unwelcomed, may not be confined to the league office or the walls of the Olympic Selection Committee. Persistent and growing whispers suggest it may reach all the way into the one place that should feel like safe ground, her own locker room. While no public confrontations or documented locker room ruptures have surfaced, the on-court body language throughout the course of this season has painted a consistently compelling and troubling portrait. In countless instances where Clark has absorbed a hard and illegal foul, the cavalry has been conspicuously and repeatedly absent. Her teammates are routinely slow to extend a hand and pull her off the floor or to step directly into the face of the player responsible. The team's other marquee player, Aaliyah Boston, has drawn particular criticism from fans and analysts alike for failing to step into the role of vocal and physical protector for her young floor general, a responsibility that is widely understood as fundamental to star pairings in professional basketball at every level. Whether this reflects a deliberate and conscious decision rooted in jealousy or simply an alarming deficit of chemistry and genuine leadership, the music outcome remains absolutely identical. Caitlin Clark frequently appears utterly and completely alone out there on that floor. This dynamic feeds directly and destructively into an uncomfortable but persistent narrative of professional envy and resentment. Is it genuinely conceivable that certain teammates harbor a quiet, seething resentment toward the enormous and all-consuming spotlight she generates wherever she goes? Do they privately feel that the offensive system is constructed entirely around her needs, or that she operates under a different and more favorable set of institutional rules? These are deeply uncomfortable and deeply loaded questions, but they are being raised by thoughtful and concerned observers for reasons that carry genuine weight. A professional basketball team is supposed to function as a tightly bound unit, a family that stands and fights as one regardless of the odds. But at this moment in time, the Indiana Fever resemble nothing so much as a fractured and disconnected collection of individuals, with their most important player left completely exposed to a league full of predators. Music. That kind of internal isolation and perceived abandonment can inflict damage that is infinitely more lasting and demoralizing than any cheap shot thrown by an opponent across the arc. And while the title of this story referenced Stephanie White, her authentic role within this unfolding saga is that of a formidable and calculating rival who serves as the perfect embodiment of the league-wide strategic opposition Clark is being forced to navigate and dismantle every single time she takes the floor. White is the widely admired and deeply respected head coach of the Connecticut Sun, Music, one of a select group of elite, disciplined, and brutally physical teams that have arrived with a clear, rehearsed, and demonstrably effective blueprint for dealing with Clark. Grind her down, suffocate her rhythm, and make every single minute of every single game an absolute living hell. Watching the meticulous and deliberate way White's team goes about the business of defending Clark provides a textbook case study in the broader collective approach the league has quietly but unmistakably adopted. They deploy their physical advantages, their deep reservoir of veteran savvy, and their sophisticated and layered defensive systems to ensure that every possession Clark touches becomes a grueling and punishing ordeal. White's public-facing comments have consistently remained professional, measured, and diplomatically respectful, but everything her team executes between the lines speaks volumes that no press conference ever could. She, along with a growing number of veteran coaches scattered across the WNBA, has carefully engineered and relentlessly refined a strategic framework built around one singular objective: dismantling and neutralizing the Caitlin Clark effect before it can take hold. This is not necessarily driven by anything resembling a personal grudge or individual animosity. Music. It is simply cold, calculated, and ruthlessly effective coaching, but it contributes enormously and undeniably to the suffocating pressure cooker atmosphere that Clark finds herself sealed inside night after night. Every single evening she suits up, she encounters a fresh coaching staff and a motivated roster whose entire defensive identity for that particular game has been constructed from the ground up around stopping her and her alone. It is a relentless, punishing, and seemingly endless gauntlet with no reprieve visible anywhere on the horizon. And it makes abundantly and painfully clear that there will not be a single comfortable, unchallenged night waiting for her anywhere in this league. The Stephanie Whites of the WNBA are not the central villains of this unfolding drama, but they represent a constant, formidable, and thoroughly exhausting reminder of the truly mountainous challenge Clark is forced to confront: Music. Every single time she steps between those lines. A war she has been left to wage almost entirely on her own. All of this leads us inescapably and inevitably toward the boiling point, that critical and defining moment where rampant and feverish speculation begins to feel less like rumor and more like unavoidable foregone conclusion. The pervasive and persistent quit rumors were not born from any single isolated incident or one particularly bad night. They are the entirely logical and utterly predictable endpoint of a relentless, multi-front psychological and physical siege being conducted against a 22-year-old athlete. Simply pause for a moment and genuinely consider the staggering and crushing weight of everything she is carrying simultaneously. There is the immense and almost suffocating pressure of being designated the public face and lone savior of an entire professional league. There is a coaching staff that appears either fundamentally incapable or deeply unwilling to fully protect and advocate for her well-being. There are opponents from every franchise in the league physically targeting her with calculated and malicious intent on a nightly and unrelenting basis. There is the ultimate professional dream of pulling on a Team USA uniform and competing for Olympic glory, publicly and humiliatingly ripped away from her in front of the entire sporting world. And music. In perhaps the cruelest and most gut-wrenching twist of all, she may not even be able to lean on the full-throated, unconditional, and unwavering support of the very players who share her locker room every single day. Any single one of these devastating factors standing alone would be more than sufficient to test the psychological fortitude and competitive resolve of even the most seasoned and battle-hardened professional athlete. Music. But to have every single one of them descending simultaneously in one cascading and relentless torrent of negativity creates a set of circumstances that feels genuinely and completely unsustainable for any human being, let alone someone navigating the chaos and vulnerability of their very first professional season. This has long since transcended anything resembling a basketball story. It has become a psychological war of attrition, fought on every conceivable front simultaneously. And right now, Caitlin Clark is waging that war entirely and heartbreakingly alone. Music. The whispers are amplifying by the day because the accumulating body of evidence has become far too overwhelming and far too consistent to dismiss or explain away. So while no formal trade demand has been officially submitted and no public declaration of frustration or discontent has been issued, you are compelled to ask yourself with genuine seriousness, music. Just how much more can any one person reasonably and humanly be expected to endure? The luminous and universally celebrated fairy tale of Caitlin Clark arriving to rescue and elevate the WNBA has been brutally and unceremoniously replaced by the grim and darkening reality of whether she can even rescue herself and her extraordinary career from this perfect and merciless storm of adversity closing in from all directions. The warning signs of an athlete approaching her absolute breaking point are visible and undeniable for the entire world to witness. The on-court anguish etched across her face, the visible and heartbreaking isolation in moments of crisis, the mounting physical and emotional toll that no young athlete should ever be asked to carry alone. Music. It is a genuine and profound tragedy unfolding in broad daylight, in real time, in front of millions of helpless and heartbroken observers. We are watching a true generational talent, a full-blown cultural phenomenon, being pushed mercilessly and without conscience to the very edge of her limits by the same league that owes its current relevance, music, entirely to her presence. The question being asked is no longer whether she will reach that breaking point. It is simply a matter of when that moment finally arrives. And as the pressure continues its relentless escalation with no relief, no protection, and no rescue visible anywhere on the horizon, the once unthinkable notion of Caitlin Clark demanding a way out of Indiana may not simply represent her best available option. It may ultimately prove to be the only one she has left.